Hey everyone, welcome in. Time for another edition of the Pick Six. I'm your host, Mike Wobschall, inside TCO Studios in Eagan. Thank you for submitting your questions. Now let's get to work and answer them. The first one comes from Mike in South Dakota. What is your explanation of the performance from the first string offense outside of Cook's run? Was it a fluke or not? Well, Mike, I think part of it was fluky because the offense has looked good all of training camp, and in the first two preseason games, the first string offense came out and looked really sharp. Plus, we loved the long touchdown run that Dalvin Cook had, so all that is good news. The bad news is, for the other drives in that game, we had negative plays, sacks, or penalties, and that's what really hurt us. So if we can make a few small corrections, get rid of those negative plays, then I think the offense will be back on track. Next question comes from Ricky in Texas. Do you think Bisi Johnson deserves to be the third wide receiver over BB at this point? Well, I don't know about that. I think we get wrapped up in WR3 and 4 and who's in what order. At the end of the day, we're going to need both Bisi Johnson and Chad Beebe to be productive players for us on offense and on special teams. So I think we're going to need both guys. Now, Bisi Johnson, as a rookie, very impressive to come in your first season, your first training camp, look good, and then come out in preseason games and also look good. So I think he's got a bright future in this league, and I think he can help us on game days in the regular season. Next question comes from Rob in Illinois. I've really liked what I've seen out of Khari Blasingame this preseason, and I personally would love to see him make the roster. Your thoughts? Well, look, Blasingame has scored a touchdown in every single preseason game, and he's another guy who can help on special teams as well. Now, he plays fullback, and the Vikings have a rock star fullback in C.J. Ham, so I don't think Khari is going to supplant C.J. Ham, but I do think Khari can help us win games this season, so it will not surprise me to see him stick around on the roster. Our next question comes from Brett in California. Given how good Oli Udoh has looked, do you think we will have to keep him on the 53-man roster to avoid losing him to a waiver claim? Well, time will tell on that, but I do think Udoh has looked really good. He's got the potential to be a guy who can play on either side of the line of scrimmage at offensive tackle. He did some really good things in the first two preseason games. It's really hard to find quality offensive linemen as starters and as depth guys. So when you have them, you got to hold on to them, and I think Oli is one of those guys. Next question comes from Nick in LA. Why don't we see centers and backup centers as long snappers and specialists who can handle punting, kickoffs, and field goals? Well, Nick, that's a good question, because if you did do that, you'd save a roster spot or two, which a GM or a head coach would always be in favor of doing. But the tricky part with that is those specialists, the punters, the kickers, and the long snappers, they have to practice with each other to generate synergy. Those guys need to work well together, and they can't do that if they're also out there practicing on offense or defense. So that's really what it comes down to, and we should not undervalue the importance of those jobs. These guys are specialists, and they have to spend a lot of time on the practice field working on their craft. Next question comes from Rick in St. Peter. Of the games in the first month of the season, which do you feel is the most important to helping us get off to a fast start? Well, Rick, I don't think you can overlook the first game ever, but especially this season, because the Vikings are playing an NFC opponent, which is important, especially when it comes to tie-breaking procedures at the end of the season for playoffs, and we're also at home, and I think the Vikings need to be near perfect at home this season if they want to dethrone the Chicago Bears and win the NFC North. We have a tough slate of road games, especially in the second part of the season. We have two West Coast primetime games in the month of December. So tough road schedule, and we can grant ourselves a little bit of leeway on those road games if we can go perfect at home, and we can't win all of our home games if we don't win the first one against Atlanta on September 8th. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Pick Six, but we're going to be back next week. So use the email address at the bottom of the screen and send us your questions or opinions, and maybe we'll see you in next week's edition of the Pick Six.